Employer doesn't want me to waste 2 hours. They waste 40 instead. A number of years ago I worked for a small, fairly local outsourcing company. I was assigned to work with a particularly high-profile client of theirs. The client's office was just around the corner from my employer, but my employer insisted that I remain within their own offices to work, so the client provided me with a laptop to use that connected to their network remotely. It's important to note that whilst the client was decent, my employer had a totally fear-based management culture. The managers wanted eyes on the employees at all times because they assumed people would slack off given half the chance. After almost a year of working there, I got a call from the client notifying me that my client-given laptop needed some critical updates, and I would have to bring it in so IT could apply the updates locally. All sounded very reasonable to me. I brought this to the attention of my manager and advised I would be out of the office for a while so I could take my laptop to the client site around the corner for critical updates. No bueno. My manager ignored everything about the critical updates part and focused instead on the out of our office for 2 hours part. They insisted that they knew I had a remote connection to the client's office, so any updates could be applied without me needing to leave and take my laptop anywhere. I got the impression they thought I was lying to get some free time off. I decided that this had the potential to teach my employer, the managers, a great lesson about not trusting their own employees. So like the model employee I shrugged "you know best bosses," and complied with their request, continuing working as usual. Until the following morning, when I switched on my laptop and nothing would work. The machine refused to connect to the client's remote network. The various software applications I used for my job also wouldn't run due to the lack of connection. Error messages flashed up on every file I tried to access, warning that my credentials had been blocked. I was left holding a very expensive brick. My manager was livid when I explained I couldn't do any work. They clicked around on my laptop trying to fix it themselves, but there was no other solution to be had. They sent me around the corner to the client's office so I could hand in my laptop to IT. I took my time enjoying a coffee and breakfast in the client's on-site cafe whilst IT worked on my laptop, but when I went to check on it after an hour, I believe the client IT manager's words were "it stuck." The critical update mentioned before was intended to repair something wrong with the way the remote connections worked. When my machine didn't get the update, it lost connection with the client's network and immediately locked me out of everything, effectively blacklisting my credentials. IT manager explained that they would have to build me an entirely new machine and set up new accounts, a process that would take about a week to ensure everything filtered through correctly and could be tested. The client was fine and understanding about it, but when I returned empty-handed to my employer's office, my manager got extremely snotty with me and insisted I still had to work somehow. I pointed out that I had no client laptop to work on, so instead of sending me home they forced another employee to share her computer with me. For the next week, me and my colleague shared her computer, 1 hour each at a time. As I had no access to any of my files, client data etc., all I could do was the barest minimum of work, sending a few emails from my colleague's account. After a week I got my new client laptop and things went back to normal, but the week of sharing meant my employer had lost around 40 hours of productivity from 2 employees. The shared pain of the experience with my colleague brought us closer together, and when my employer lost their contract with my client a few years later, she helped me get a new job with my employer's competitor. TLDR. Manager doesn't want to let me out of the office for 2 hours to get critical updates applied to my client laptop. They lose 40 hours over the next week instead when my client laptop breaks itself. Now to the comments. Those kinds of managers are the absolute worst. If you can't hire employees you can trust, how can you run your business? Glad you got out of there. The thing is that it's not that the company can't trust its employees. It's incompetent managers who fear that if the employees prove they can work without constant supervision they'll lose their jobs. I've worked for too many managers like this and absolutely despise both them, and the idiotic companies that employ this kind of micromanager. Yep, that's why the pandemic was a slap to those managers' faces, because it turns out we really don't need them, and now companies are getting rid of their roles as more people are being allowed to stay working from home. You could have got the client's IT to email your boss to confirm they need the machine. Your way was funnier though. I'm just imagining they spent the whole pandemic losing staff to other employers that support work from home while they insist people come to the office. OP replied, The last I heard through old connections was that they were hemorrhaging contracts, couldn't keep the clients. Apparently, the office became a ghost town long before the pandemic was ever a thing. My old manager was shuffled off elsewhere in the business. The most satisfying moment of my life was not quitting, it was when 2 people from what had been a 5-people team quit because I had left. The company was also hemorrhaging contracts and all of us knew why, but bosses had been doing things this way since the start and would not listen. They were focused on monitoring us every second every day, and when our office had a blackout for about 40 minutes, they had us doing work on paper even though all the information and tools were on the computers that obviously wouldn't turn on. We literally had nothing on paper. It was that important that we should not get to rest while there was no electricity. I feel lucky I wasn't working there when COVID hit, because no way they would have ever agreed to remote work. I've only had people reporting to me a couple of times in my career, and none were hired by me. I was promoted, they were there already, but I've always started by implicitly trusting them to do their work. They were fine before I showed up, and if they couldn't be trusted, someone would have told me. Never had a problem. I just don't get micromanagers. Exactly. I feel like as managers the best way to do our job is to take away their blockers and be someone they can trust to moan to. If a manager doesn't trust the employee to such an extent that they need to micromanage them, either the employees are not the right fit for the company, or more likely the manager needs to self-evaluate themselves. If a manager doesn't trust the employee to such an extent that they need to micromanage them, either the employees are not the right fit for the company. My mother has had to pull that card out in a meeting on more than one occasion. If you don't trust me to know what you are paying me $120,000 a year to be an expert at, we need to discuss my severance package so I can start looking for someone who can trust me. This is a common issue in corporate environments. Clearly the answer is to return to typewriters. Sarcasm. Sir, the typewriter ran out of ink tape. I need to get over to the client to get a new one. What? No way. You don't need no fancy ink tape. Just keep working without one. Clearly, a mangler who has shares in whoever still makes carbon paper. Most people, most of the time, will perform according to demonstrated expectations. So, if you treat people as untrustworthy, that is what you are cultivating. My boss and I conflicted over trust every single day. She ran the store and I worked under her running the shipments/stocking department. She would create extra work to validate my staff was doing their job, but then not trust them to do the validating task itself. My staff had to read reports every 45 to 60 minutes, then make decisions on those reports about putting out the right product. For example, if we needed to put out 100 t-shirts today, if the report says we already put out 120, then stop. If it says we put out 80, let's put a few more out. I wanted to create a laminated poster in the processing area that said the targets. Then when they printed off the report, they could just cross the category off and announce it to the 8 to 10 staff processing, and anyone who forgot the update had a quick visual reminder. My boss created a spreadsheet that took 15 minutes to update and showed the plus or minus of each category every hour. She did not believe in training in any way a normal person would, and scorned supervisors if while updating this report, anyone wandered from their station, including to use the bathroom or address a spill normally the supervisor would address. This lack of training and added stress meant, my staff made mistakes. Who could have imagined? So now, I had to update this report and give direction based off of it. Every hour or so I'd take 15 minutes for the spreadsheet. Then she added that I had to go to the floor and validate the report the company gives us based on data, was correct. This once 3 to 5 minute task now consumed my entire days. I could go on and on about this woman and how unrealistic, unforgiving and controlling she was. But I quit after COVID shut us down and I finally snapped into reality that she was psychotic.